So, as we've seen on the show, I really like interviewing candidates running in the 2026 midterms, and we have gone through roughly 11 or so, and I've still not come up with a name for it. So, I'm calling it 2026 Watch right now. And with this new branding, I am so excited for our next guest, who is officially the first 2026 Watch guest. He is a candidate for Congress running in the 8th District. He is a very active member in the community and is joining us here today to talk about the headlines, his race for Congress, and a lot more. I am joined today by Chris Kallas. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ishana Show today.
Thank you very much for having me. And for your guests, my name is spelled like Christ, but pronounced Christ. And then my last name is like Dallas, but it starts with a K. And thank you, Ishan, for having me on the podcast and for hosting this podcast, especially someone, and I don't want to use your youth as a crutch here, but when I was 19 years old, I had no interest in running a podcast and interviewing political candidates with my free time. So I really applaud you for doing this because it is part of I want to call it a civic duty, but you don't have a duty to have a podcast. But getting involved in politics when you know what you care about and being able to get the news to people and your peers, that's an incredible resource. And it is very resourceful of you to put this whole thing together. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I mean, yes, the show has always been a passion. I've always believed in bringing in the news and bringing folks like yourself who are running for office directly to my audience. We are primarily younger, so it's always good to engage that group of people. So before we get into our interview here today, why don't you take a couple of minutes to just introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start way back in the beginning. So I was born in Northern Illinois, rural Northern Illinois, out in a town called Dixon is where I was born, but then I grew up just south of that in Amboy, Illinois. Dixon is the hometown of Ronald Reagan, as many people might know. And a little aside, I did work in the Democratic office in Dixon, Illinois for a short stint during a special election in 2012, or no, for a congressional election in 2012. And they have a statue of Ronald Reagan that is right next to the river. He's on a horse, and Ronald Reagan has a six pack, of course, and he's staring down the Democratic office. That was put in by the Republican administration, of course, to let the Democrats know how to feel. But that's the kind of area I grew up in. But while I was growing up in Amboy, Illinois, I was being taught by my mom. My dad unfortunately passed when I was 5 years old. And my mom raised me as a single mom from there on. She really wanted me to understand the value of money, what it took to work in America and to have a life work out for you. So as soon as I was 13, I started detasseling corn for $5.25 an hour. And I did that through summers as I studied and saved up to go to the University of Illinois. One of the tragedies in my life, of course, losing my father ended up being a benefit to my education because his life insurance was used by my mom, put into a college Illinois savings account back in 1992 or 1993. And then I was paying 1993 tuition rates in 2006. So I was very lucky that I essentially got to live the American dream that I want to be able to bring to the people of my district in being able to go to college for a very low cost. I was able to work my way through college by having part-time jobs, which is something that really you only have that story back in the 80s and maybe early 90s now, as college has ballooned in price. And after that, after working those middle school summers, I got into the University of Illinois. I studied politics there. I graduated in 2010. While I was there, I knocked doors for the Obama campaign. Graduated in 2010 into the worst economy in a generation at that time. Of course, we've had a couple of worst economies in a generation since then, unfortunately. And so I immediately thought about jumping back into grad school. I went to NIU for a year before I withdrew from grad school because I had to make money instead of spending it on school. That was just the economic situation. I pursued a couple of marketing internships while I was working another part-time job so that I could pay rent. And that ended up turning into a 12-year career in marketing. Over that time, I worked, like I mentioned earlier, for a campaign out in rural Amboy or rural Dixon, Illinois, and it went down to Amboy was the district at the time. I think it was the 14th or the 11th. We've redrawn them a lot since then. And I was working for the Bill Foster campaign there. I then knocked doors for Unite Local 1 in Chicago to get better working rights for hotel workers. Got into my 12-year career until last year when I got laid off. And through a bunch of hardships that my wife and I faced, we realized that the state government doesn't really work for us. And then the federal government kind of slammed into our plans with the election of Donald Trump. It took me 6 weeks to get a unemployment check that wouldn't even cover the average cost of rent in my district. And then all that to say that this last March, I decided to run for Congress because I had had enough. And it seemed like the leadership in the Democratic Party in Congress had abandoned working folks like me. And so that's why I'm stepping up to run. So that is the long story short of where I started and how I got here.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I did not know a lot of that about you. It's a very what am I looking for? A very working class story, really. And it's a
Well,
story that
I am working class. It's like
absolutely.
a lot of my opponents, they say they come from a working class background. I am working class. Up until last year, I was working for a living, and then I transitioned to be a house spouse before because my wife was the sole bread earner here. And then I transitioned to running for Congress from that.
And I think those are some experiences that a lot of people can relate with. I should also note for the audience, just that I have a little bit of a nasally voice. I'm a little bit under the weather, but that the show must always go on, as I like to say. Let's talk a little bit about your race here in the eighth. So, as you might know, we've had a few of your opponents on the show, and I've asked a lot of them about what they're hearing at the doors. I've gotten different answers from everybody, and I think that's just how these things go. Different people go to different doors. Some of the things that have been reported include the Medicare and Social Security cuts, the state of democracy in our country, the chaos that Donald Trump has inflicted on our country. Is that roughly what you're hearing at the doors? Is there something else that I miss? What are you hearing at the doors? What are people in the eighth saying right now?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a unique perspective because I'm the only working class candidate running in this race, and I obviously lead with my introduction because people don't know who I am. I'm new to politics, and so the one of the first things that people say to me generally when I'm talking to them on the phone or at the door is that they thank me for running because of my perspective, because it does, like you mentioned, match up with a lot of the lived experiences that they've had. Beyond that, what they're worried about politically is it's economics. Number one, they're worried about. I talked to a woman from my district, and she echoes the story of a lot of the farm friends that I had growing up. So older people in their mid 60s. She was younger and she owned her own business, but it was kind of hand to mouth for her, and she was raising a daughter on her own. And her plan was not to retire, it was to die before she got there because she knew she wasn't going to be saving enough money to be able to leave anything to her kids. And she knew that based on the way her business was going, and she was in her mid to late 40s, that she just didn't feel like there was hope for the future at all. And that economic devastation is reflected by almost everybody that I talk to in one way or the other. They're obviously worried about Donald Trump and this administration and their executive overreach. They're worried about their neighbors being kidnapped off the streets. And I hear that all the time as well. And I'd say the third thing that I hear the absolute most is people asking me to fight like hell for them. That is what they want. They just don't feel it from the current politicians that are in Congress, especially, but that they see in the Democratic Party. And a lot of them feel left behind. So I'm having a lot of those conversations that we talk about everything in life because everything in life is affected by politics. I talked to somebody who, like me, so I have a back disability, and I was laid off after I requested an accommodation for it. And the Trump administration essentially shuttered the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which would process those claims and then tell you whether or not you had a right to go after the company that had wronged you. And so I don't have an avenue of justice through the federal government, as do many people. So those are just some of the things I hear. But everybody has their own personal economic issues that are affecting them, but they're all obviously very connected.
I mean, I did not know that. I mean, I'd heard about the EEOC stuff for sure, but I did not know it affected people in such a way. I'm so sorry that they did such a thing. It's an absolute shame, and There's something you said that really caught my ear, which is people feel left behind. That is the theme of politics, I could say from 2024, but the truth and reality is that this is the same thing I've been hearing for many years now covering politics. People feel left behind. And I've talked to a lot of people in politics who want to change that. But naturally, it's a very complicated thing because how do you make someone feel not left behind is not easy. So when you look at this real challenge of making sure everyone feels counted, how do you go about achieving that?
So I'll tell you how I go about doing it, and that's I lead with what I want to do. I want to change the heart of the Democratic Party. That is my number one goal. And most other people, when you ask them that, most other politicians especially, they're going to give you policy position after policy position, which doesn't connect with somebody. We have great policy in the Democratic Party. I'm not gonna deny that at all. We want to do what's best, but we think just telling people, hey, we want to do what's best is enough, and it's not. They need to feel it. And I won't say very many positive things about Republican politicians, especially leadership in the Republican Party. The one positive thing I will say about them is that they lead with emotion. Sometimes it's off of a bald-faced lie, which obviously we shouldn't do on this side of the aisle. But you should lead with emotion and let people know how you want to fight for them. So to your question, it's like, how do you prove to them? Well, number one, I tell them up front, I want to change the heart of the Democratic Party. And number two, they say how. And so I have a plan. I studied politics in college, but I'm also very good at following directions. And last cycle in Congress, we had the perfect plan laid out before us by Matt Gaetz. And again, I don't want to compliment Republicans too much, but he, for the wrong reasons, tried to take over the Republican caucus by not voting for a speaker. He knew that the margins were so thin that him and five of his friends could make sure that a speaker wasn't going to get elected unless they were going to do exactly what those five people wanted. So the Democrats need to take that page out of their book. I, along with 15 to 25 progressive members of the House of Representatives, can take over the Democratic caucus and not vote for speaker unless they pass our agenda, which for me is the Working Families Bill of Rights, which is 8 guarantees that really drags the United States into the 21st century as far as it is taking care of our citizens. But with those motivated 25 progressives, we can make the caucus do what they don't want to do, which is get money out of politics and stop the dark money from flowing. So that is how I tell people that I'm going to change the Democratic Party. And then through doing that, you're obviously going to change Congress and the country as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying it for years. We got to take a page out of their book because they do that one thing right. Now, I guess let's switch gears a little bit because you brought in a little transition over there for me, which is the Republicans. You mentioned them and their flagship policy, which they call the Big Beautiful Bill. That I don't call that. I call it the Big Ugly Bill. And I've pointed it out in every episode, and I'm going to do it here too, just as a reminder. It takes 17 million Americans off of their health care, 3 million people, including veterans and seniors, off of food assistance, takes kids off of free school lunches, among a whole host of things that it does. I don't think it'd be possible for me, unfortunately, to cover even 50% of all of this in a full season of this show, but there's just so much. So my question for you is, what is something that concerns you about the Big Ugly Bill? Is there something in specific that us here in the media are not focusing on as much that maybe we should be taking a look at, or maybe people should know about, and that's going to affect them? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing that I focus on, and I really try to look at it through the perspective of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The number one thing is how many people are going to die because of this bill. And so I did the calculations for my district alone, and kicking people off of Medicare, requiring work requirements, kicking people off of Medicaid and Social Security. We're going to see 5,000 people more per year die earlier than they should have because of this bill. Those 5,000 Americans don't deserve this. They deserve to have a government that works for them. So 17 million are kicked off. 5,000 per district are in danger of dying every year that this type of policy is in place, as obviously these initial cuts are going to weaken Social Security. They're going to weaken Medicare. They're going to weaken Medicaid. But in the future, it's going to be even easier for the system to collapse. So yes, it's 17 million in the next couple of years. But over the next decade, how many more tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans are going to be affected by these extreme cuts. So that's my number one. And just to transition a little bit, that's why my number one policy in the Working Families Bill of Rights is universal personal health care, because there's 50,000 of us already dying without insurance in America. And that is unconscionable in the richest country in the world. So add to that an extra 5,000 people per district, and we're getting to numbers that it feels like the federal government is at war with its people.
Absolutely. You mentioned how Republicans are able to tap into the minds of working class folks, but uh, how do you think they're gonna sell such a, like, let's call it by what it is, crappy policy? Well, I don't swear on the show that much, so I'm not gonna go into that, but it's just a really bad piece of policy. Yet there are still so many people who don't know about this, who don't know how it's going to affect them. And I think the biggest challenge, what I feel for Democrats, is getting that message out. That's why I mention it without fail in every episode. But my reach is only so far. Your reach is only so far. How do we come together and amplify the effects that it's going to have on people? And how are we going to communicate that? Because as someone I was talking to recently pointed out, not a lot of these go into effect until after 2026, after people
Oh,
vote.
oh yeah. And the stipulations in the bill are set in such a way as to hurt Democrats the most. And it's the same thing that Trump did in 2016 when he passed his tax bill. And it was that essentially they made it in such a way that any of the good provisions of the bill, any tax credits that are given to people in the middle class, expire, and any of the benefits to the richest Americans. So this is a $5 trillion bill, the benefit of which is going mostly to the top 50 richest families in the country. That's never going to expire. So
No.
when time comes for another after the midterms, you're going to see Democrats sweep into power, but then the tax bill is going to slam into the Democratic caucus, and they're going to feel like they have to answer for this tax bill that has already been passed by a Republican administration. And so I think to be able to get the word out, we have to talk about it. Just in general, we have to hang this on the shoulders of the Republicans who passed this tax bill. And every time we have one of these conversations, especially after this tax bill takes effect, we need to bring the stats. Here's how many people have lost Social Security because of this. Here's how many people lost Medicaid. Here's how many people have died as a direct result of this bill. And when we communicate that, Americans can't, they don't stand for that. They don't stomach it. And throughout history, we've seen when you start attacking our friends and neighbors, Americans stand up and we say enough is enough. And we've seen this type of authoritarian overreach before. As much as we'd like it to just be unique to the Trump administration, it's not. He's the same type of president that we would have expected in the 1800s or the early 1900s. I mean, you can go back even to Nixon. Nixon was obviously a criminal, and he was pardoned by a party and not removed from office by a party who wanted to do the politically expedient thing. So how did we get here? We're always doing the politically expedient thing. We being the federal government. And so that is the difficulty I share with you is like, how do we tell people, especially in a media ecosystem where we're kind of separated, everybody gets their news or entertainment that they think is news from different sources. And so we don't have that guiding light like Dan Rather, who tells us, here are the facts, please make up your own mind, and have 70% of America tuning in. At very best, I think that I would be ecstatic if 1% of 1% of the country could listen to what I said, right? Let alone 70% of the nation listening to the same news source.
I totally agree. Maybe one day we can get 70% here on this show. I don't know. Now, speaking of trending authoritarianism, Donald Trump has done a lot. It's a new flavor. I guess you're kind of right about that. It's the same package, but a different flavor of the authoritarianism we're seeing. And in most recent news, we are hearing that the White House is now flirting with the idea of sending the National Guard to the city of Chicago, which, of course, as folks know, is part of your district, and for many people in your district, just like a 30-minute drive out. Um, what are we supposed to make of this? We've seen it in DC, we saw it in LA. Should Chicago brace for chaos?
Yes and no. It's a nuanced question because what is going to happen is an optics campaign. This is a PR campaign by the Trump administration. Now, that isn't to say we shouldn't take it seriously. We, of course, should, but we have to look at it from the perspective of what are they getting? They are trying to put troops in American cities, generally blue cities, of course, where they say the crime rate is higher, but if you do the math and you look at the stats, it's not. So they're not actually trying to stop crime. So you have to ask yourself, what are they doing? They're trying to look tough. Donald Trump is afraid. He is a old man who has been opposed a lot. Anytime he's not opposed, he continues to push forward. Anytime he is opposed, he shrinks back. And we need to make sure that we oppose him in every single way we can. And I think that we need to have peaceful protests in Chicago like they had in LA. We need to make sure that if the National Guard is there, anytime you see National Guard troops out roaming around, for the most part, they don't want to be there either. They don't want to follow these orders, but they have higher ups who I've seen it, videos from DC. As soon as you accost one of them, they say, okay, can you please call my supervisor and let them know? And they hand the people a card so that they can do that. And that's their signal that, hey, we don't want to be here either. But that doesn't mean that, some people think that they're doing their patriotic duty. They have been tricked. And so we have to be out there and we have to remind them, no, we're just citizens and we don't want you here. So I say peaceful protest. We got to have a mass shutdown in Chicago if they bring the National Guard here. But just like in LA, my guess is that they're going to choose a very small part. It's going to be a couple of blocks. We need to make sure that we meet them where they are and not kind of treat it like they're everywhere in Chicago. A lot of the social media of the National Guard in LA or DC, they really tried to play up how everywhere they were because that's good for the shot. But in LA, they were in like a 2 square block radius for most of the time that they were there. Most of the people in LA, not even most, it's like 95% of the people in LA wouldn't have even been able to see them if they wanted to because they're not in their normal daily commutes. I think the same thing's going to be true in Chicago. Obviously, it's different in DC because it's a federal district. We're going to see the National Guard, and it looks like they are going to get deployed. We're going to see the National Guard there for, I would guess, a couple of weeks max. And every single day they're there. We have to be out there to meet them. And it has to be people like me, elected representatives leading the way, people who want to be elected representatives leading the way, candidates for Congress, local, state. I want sheriffs out there. Anybody who is in a position of authority, you have to show your constituents that you're ready to stand up and do what's right.
That goes really well into this next question. I've been asking folks on the show that I've been coming on, which is, in this real moment of crisis, and again, like I said, I can list it for hours and hours and hours what the crisis is. I mean, if I can speak on a personal level, it's this idea of freedom of speech being attacked, freedom of the media being attacked. And I sometimes do wonder how sustainable this show can be going forward. But there's people across this country that have personalized concerns of their own when they see what they are doing. And so a lot of people are looking to folks like yourself and elected officials for leadership and guidance in this moment. Now, you did allude to some of the things that people could do, but more broadly, what could we do as a country, as a community, as a city, going all the way up from the top down? What can we do to make sense of this moment and push back against clearly, in many cases, illegal and unconstitutional things?
Number one is you got to take care of yourself. Just like the manual in every flight says, you have to put your mask on before you can help other people. So that means checking in with yourself. Before I started running for politics, I was guilty of doom scrolling. I'd see the worst information over and over and over again. And at some point, it became a strain on my mental health, and I had to put it down. I had to create guardrails for myself. I encourage everybody else to do so. If you intake all of the news from the United States, not just the world, but the United States all the time, especially if you are intaking all of this bad news, it is going to start having a physical effect on you. So that is the number one thing. Number two is you have to ready yourself by studying history a little bit. I'm saying cruise some Wikipedia articles, just search for authoritarians in the United States. I can tell you a quick story of masked federal agents patrolling in Boston, masked federal agents patrolling in Boston, stealing people off the streets, being guarded and patrolled by Marines who were helping the masked federal agents. And that was during the after the Dred Scott decision, and that was the fugitive slave era of American history. And do you know what Americans did when their black neighbors were kidnapped off the streets? We stood up and we said, no, that we're not going to stand for this. And we had a corrupt president who worked with a corrupt Supreme Court to get the Dred Scott decision done, so he could do exactly that. And when in World War II, we had Japanese internment. We stood up as a nation and we said, no, this is wrong. We can't do this to our friends and neighbors, especially fellow American citizens. So the same thing's going to happen this time. We just have to understand what tactics were used in the past to be able to defeat this, and what can we do to apply those tactics today. So being a little bit of a student of history, even at a superficial level, will help immensely understand the moment that we're in America. And the number three thing is get involved. You're going to have a lot of energy inside of yourself, and you need to be able to have an outlet for that. Otherwise, it is going to come out in ways that you don't want it to. I was at a Democratic meeting, and they were fired up. There were some new members, and they wanted to fight like hell, but they didn't have that outlet. And so they really wanted to kind of take it out on other Democrats who they didn't agree with 100%. It is a big tent party. Anybody who's not a fascist can fit under this tent right now. And once we're through this kind of authoritarian period of our history, then we can have those meaningful discussions. But I want to say that with this caveat, we cannot forget the people at the same time. We can't come together and forget the smaller groups of people who make this party amazing and who have historically not had a seat at the table. So those are the things that we have to do. And that boils down to knowing what's going on, knowing yourself, and helping your neighbors.
I think we can really appreciate that message, because I've been talking to people myself over the past few weeks who have been excited. They want to do something. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. They don't know what it looks like, but they come up to me and they say, I want to do something. So, it's the same message. Go get involved, go do your research. And I like that student of history thing. That is something we all need to be doing, because we do have a problem in this country of forgetting. I mean, where did I hear it? I heard it somewhere where someone said history tends to repeat itself because everyone that lived it died. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just true. Like everyone back then died, and so now there's no one here to remember it. So we need more students of history everywhere. I have a couple more questions before we wrap up here. First, if you are elected, and let's say you're sitting in the Shining Halls of Congress 2027, maybe we have a House majority, maybe we have a Senate majority, even better. What is your well, let's do two questions. What is your
Yeah.
first priority as a member of Congress? What do you want to focus on? And what is your 100-day agenda? How about that?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So my first priority is going to be whipping up the Progressive Caucus to get enough members to be able to take over the Democratic Caucus. That is the number one goal. And if we can't do that, if we can't, I call it flipping the iceberg. I don't know if you know, but icebergs, sometimes the top will start to melt. It'll get less and less mass, and then it'll flip over. Progressives are underneath the water right now. We are the ones who are the mass of the party in the local jurisdictions. But at the top in Congress, it is mostly corporate Democrats. They're going to melt away, and we're going to have the progressives kind of flip the iceberg over, and we're going to take over. That is the number one thing I have to get done. The number two, what is my 100-day agenda? My 100-day agenda is to pass the Working Families Bill of Rights and to stop the United States from providing arms to the Netanyahu regime in Israel. Those are my two biggest. One is obviously domestic policy, the Working Families Bill of Rights, and that's my biggest piece of foreign policy. And I am willing to work once we have the caucus taken over across the party to be able to get that done, across the House and Senate to be able to dog walk it through there. And at that time, assuming that Donald Trump is still president, which at this point seems like it's going to be a pretty big likelihood, I am going to do everything I can to get his signature on the Working Families Bill of Rights. Now, I'm not going to give away anything from this Working Families Bill of Rights. I want it to be so politically detrimental to Donald Trump and the Republican Party to not sign this bill that he feels forced to have to do it, just to be able to continue his presidency for the last lame duck part of it. And assuming that I can't do that in the first 100 days, because Donald Trump he's an obstinate, stubborn human being. I will take my message to the streets. Every time I'm in a committee hearing, I am going to be pointing out how much dark money each of the members of Congress has been taking, how much money they have made off of their stock trades. I'm going to try to bring light to the corruption because that's the only way that we're going to be able to fight it. And then, if need be, I will run for a second term to be able to finish out my agenda. I truly would not like to spend more than 2 or 3 stints in the House to be able to get my agenda passed because I have no interest in being a part of the political machine long term. I have interest in getting working families the rights that we need now.
It's pretty noble of you to not want to stick around. I don't know. Hope some of the people up there get that message, right? And you know what? They claim to be the party of the working class. He says the working class put him in office. I mean, he said he'd lower costs. On day one, the only executive order he did sign that had anything to do with costs, I always like to point this out, was raising them because he got rid of Biden era Medicare negotiating protections. That was the one thing on day one that he said he would, that he did with executive orders, even though on day one he said he would lower costs. So this is a very hypocritical guy we're talking about. So, you know, if you are elected, I wish you the best of luck in getting that through. I mean, hopefully it is something in some sense politically tough enough for him to have to sign it. We'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. But Chris, we are unfortunately almost running out of time here for our interview. But before I do let you go, are there any parting thoughts you'd like to share with my audience?
I just want to thank you for doing this because it helps get my voice out and it helps people in the 8th district understand their choices. I know you've been interviewing candidates from the 8th, and I am extremely happy that there are 9 of us running because the more of us that run, the more people we're going to reach. And I think we're all on the same page. And like I said earlier, it's a big tent, and the only ones who can't really be in it right now are fascists. And so anti-fascism is a big tent. My parting thought here is I want to thank my opponents for running their races, for reaching out to the people that they have, because the more of us that do that, the more likely we make sure that there's not going to be a Republican going from our district to Congress, which would be detrimental for not just this district, but the entire country.
Yeah, and if you are running in the 8th district, I've had your opponents on, Chris, today. You know, my email is always open. DM me, find my website. I'd love to have you on. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here today for this conversation. I think it was great to introduce you to more people in the 8th, and I'd hope to have you back on sometime for an update on the campaign. How does that sound?
Sounds amazing. Anytime, Michonne.
Perfect. Thank you so much.